I keep wanting to do like nice tight intros where you can like actually see me, but then you wouldn't be able to see the Christmas sweaters. Hi friends, my name is Al, or Lilstarnerd, and welcome to another video in my 12 days of Christmas. Today's video, I'm not super excited about it. As I'm sure you can tell by the title, I'm, apprehensive. Am I dreading the fact that I'm gonna have to use art supplies that only have bad memories? Yes. Am I excited that it's an excuse to go buy new art supplies? Maybe. As I'm sure you know, I'm going to be using art supplies that I hate. Namely, crayons and oil pastels. In my head, these are the same thing, just like fancy and for kids. And I don't really have good memories of either of these. Pretty early on in my channel, I actually made a video like using crayons, and I don't remember exactly my thoughts, but I know I came away with that thinking like, this is just a YouTube gimmick. No one is using these. It's just a YouTube gimmick. I remember it being hard. I never really liked using them as a kid, and oil pastels are my nemesis. And because they, to me, are the same thing, I decided it'd be cool to maybe try to use them again since I'm, trying to grow as an artist. Maybe I'll find out I don't hate them, but not only like use them, but use them on the same piece. So today, I am challenging myself to draw a large portrait, one half being done with crayons and the other being done with oil pastels. And let's just hope that by the end, I don't want to die. Okay, enough stalling. Let's go. Like I said before, I have done a video before where I tried using crayons to do a portrait, but it was a while ago and I really don't remember exactly what my thoughts were at the time. All I know now is that since that video, the idea of using crayons again sounds awful. I did go and watch the video back, and I mentioned that it took a surprisingly long time. The crayon crumbs were awful, I struggled to layer and blend, and overall it was pretty difficult to do. And before that video, I obviously used them growing up as a kid, all throughout elementary school and at home and whatever. And I remember even as a kid hating them because I could just never get them to look as pretty as I wanted. When you graduate from like crayons to colored pencils being on your class supplies list, that was like such an upgrade. Crayons, after many years of fighting with them, have secured a spot in my brain as being bad, even if they don't necessarily deserve that label. So crayons, I honestly might not use a word as strong as hate, but I definitely don't like want to use them ever. And if you were to give me a box of crayons and say like, okay, use these for your next piece, like I'd be pissed, I'd be pissed. But an art supply that I do genuinely hate, oil pastels. These things, they fill me with rage. For some reason, where I live, like once you hit like 5th grade, maybe middle school, oil pastels are the only thing our teachers give you. I guess they're like cheap enough that they can buy them by the bucket and, pass them out to kids without proper supervision, and like who cares if they get broken or used up or disgusting, I guess. So like I can see why they were given to us, but God, I hated using them. Every time I walked into an art class and saw those on the table, I was just so disappointed. So yeah. Really don't like crayons, really don't like oil pastels. But today we're going to put that hatred and also dislike to the test. A lot of time has passed since I've used either of these supplies, and recently I've been doing a lot of, getting out of my comfort zone, facing my art fears, and just doing what might make me uncomfortable. And it's been going really well. I've been getting really good results, and I've learned that there's a lot of things that I feared for no reason, and that things aren't as bad as I think they are. Plus, I won't lie, I've been kind of warming up to the idea of oil pastels because of Black Bean CMS, or Christian, who I love. He cracks me up so much. But his pieces are so beautiful, and watching him use oil pastels really makes me think, like, maybe they don't look so bad actually. Maybe these aren't awful. I actually bought these specific oil pastels because in a video he tried them out and he used to love them a lot, and I was like, if he used these and at any point enjoyed them, they gotta be good. So here we go. Going into this piece, I was definitely worried. It's a big portrait, lots of room for errors, and it'll be really easy to see those errors because it's so big. And these are two supplies that don't give you a lot of control. I started with crayon on the left so I wouldn't have to drag my hand through the oil pastel at any point. Plus, I felt more confident with the crayons than I did the oil pastels, so I thought, kind of warm myself up, start with the crayons first. I approached the crayon portrait kind of like colored pencil. This is, I believe, the same way I approached it last time in my old crayon video. Which, by the way, I am reusing the crayons from that video. I don't know if that matters if you care, but I've had these lying around since that video. Kind of needed something to do with them, and here we are. Anyways, I went in with like really soft, light layers to get those undertones in, mostly with the regular crayons, and then I slowly built it up for more saturation and value. And then I went over with more fleshy tones, usually from the Colors of the World pack, to like burnish or render it and, blend it all and whatever. And somehow it went really well. Like, it was going so well, and it was so easy that I kept stopping to like mini panic and be like, what's going on? What's happening? Like, this is too easy. Something must be going wrong. Despite it being a really large piece, it was going really quickly. And I was loving watching it take shape, especially having that sharp cutoff in the middle. I thought that looked really cool. I love like watching my art like come together slowly. I find that so fun, especially like I said, when there's like a harsh line somewhere, like having the line in the middle, I don't know, it just adds such visual interest. It was so easy this time somehow. I don't know if it was the large paper or what. In the original crayon video, I had intended to use really large paper, but I was just freehanding the sketch. I didn't use the grid method like I did this time, and I'm really bad at drawing at like a large scale or any scale that isn't like my normal scale. And so the sketch kept shrinking and I had to keep cutting the paper down. So even back then I knew that it was probably smarter to have large paper, and I think that's definitely true based on this experience. But that wasn't the only thing that was better. The waxy buildup wasn't too bad at all, despite having issues with that last time. I had no issues layering as much as I wanted, and the crumbs were hardly an issue. I was able to get a surprising amount of control and detail, like in the eyes and mouth. Things were blending and rendering really nice. I was just really shocked with how well it was going and how beautiful it was looking. Like, I really, really liked it. The only thing I didn't love was the texture that it creates. I like texture in art, don't get me wrong, but crayon and waxy texture specifically really bothers me. It always has. Like, in the skin and in the background, you can like see that texture. I don't even know what kind of texture it is. I don't know why I don't like it so much, but I really don't like it. But yeah, everything went pretty well. Until, of course, the hair. I historically hate drawing hair, and I always phone it in. And you know what? I phoned it in this time too. It's just like I spend so long on the skin and the face, and I try so hard, because that's like the focal point. That's what I like about it. And then it's like, ew, now I have to do just as much detail in the hair. Oh my gosh. At least she had braids, and braids are much easier to fake, so that was a bonus. Using the crayons this time around and having it go really well had me thinking, like, do I like crayons now? Do I want to start using crayons? Like, I liked how this side turned out so much, I was almost considering finishing the whole thing in crayon and starting this video over. Plus, there really is the fun aspect of bringing back that childish, carefree attitude with your art. Being able to just scribble and grip the crayon like a toddler and just make marks, it feels fun. It feels low pressure. And it's so much more rewarding when your piece turns out well, when you use crayons. Since doing the piece, I've honestly been itching to pick the crayons back up, just to doodle in my sketchbook with them, swatch with them. I really wasn't expecting that kind of outcome, to fully just have a totally opposite experience and completely change my mind about crayons. It was a really pleasant surprise. I did the crayon side in one day and then did the oils the next day. And since the crayon side went so well, I was thinking like, okay, I'm probably gonna ruin it with oils now. No way both of these supplies are going to work well for me. Like, I originally thought maybe the crayon side would look trash and I'd somehow pull through with the pastels. Like, comparatively, oils are just going to be better than crayons because it's like a higher quality supply. But the crayons looked so good, now I'm thinking it's gotta be the opposite, So I was genuinely nervous to start. Like I said, I haven't used oils in so long, since early to mid high school, so like, I don't know, 7-ish years, like maybe not 10, but close, Like, that's a long time. It's a long time. And this is a brand I've never used before. I have way more experience with, I don't know what they're called, but like the chalk pastels, So I was unsure of exactly how they'd perform. Like, I couldn't feel it in my mind because I kept mixing up the kinds of pastels. Like, when I was picturing how I would work with these, I was picturing chalk pastels. I had no plan, I had no tests, no prep, I just went in because I was afraid that any sort of preparation would psych me out and I would not want to do it anymore. Before we talk about my current experience with oil pastels, let me explain to you why I don't like them. I mentioned before that they were like constantly provided to us in school art classes, and every time I saw them, I was just like so bummed because, like as a young artist, as a blossoming artist, like I wanted to make good stuff and try cool mediums and do new things. And I didn't really have that stuff at home, but I didn't have art supplies that I knew how to use or wanted to use or could experiment with. A lot of the time, I was introduced to art supplies or only had access to nice art supplies through my school art classes, especially when I was younger. So every time I had to use oil pastels instead of something cool, I was bummed about it. Not to mention, it was just so messy. You'd get them all over your hands, you'd be stained up all day, and I usually got it on my clothes. You're a kid, you're dumb. You don't have common sense or fine motor control, so you're dragging your hand across the drawing and getting it all smudgy or staining your paper every 2 seconds. The crumbs were so annoying and gross, like worse than crayons. They were like wet crayons, and I already didn't like crayons, so that was worse. They were just so difficult to work with, and I wanted to do good and detailed stuff, but at least at the time, I could not do detail with oil pastels. Like, you can't sharpen them or anything. What are you supposed to do? And they were like class oil pastels, so they'd be all beat up and messy. They'd be mixed with other colors. You couldn't even tell what color it was. And they'd be these tiny little nubs that you'd have to like pinch, and it would get under your fingernails and be really hard to use. Just overall, a bad time. Also, another reason I hate oil pastels is like sensory reasons. These are more hypothetical, like based on like the anticipation of using them and thinking about how gross it would feel. We all have those things that just like give us the chills, the heebie-jeebies, and oil pastels give me multiple types of heebie-jeebies, although mainly indirectly. I actually love the feel of oil pastels themselves. They're very soft and buttery and velvety, and I like that sensation. But what I don't like is the feel of paper. Obviously, I have learned to deal with it to some extent. As an artist, I'd be pretty screwed if I couldn't touch paper. But there are some papers that are worse than others, and certain ways of touching it that are worse than others. The thought of having to rub paper? No. Makes me want to vomit. I do not want to rub paper, which, to blend oil pastels, you usually have to do. I also don't like, this is really hard to explain and very specific. I don't like the feeling of the skin of my fingertips being pressed up against the fingernail, if that makes sense, like being pushed up under it. Like I constantly have to scrape beneath my nails to pull the skin down so it doesn't feel like it's touching the nail. Very, very weird, okay? But rubbing stuff gives me that feeling, and I don't like it. And finally, I do have hyperhidrosis, which means like excessive sweating in specific places of the body, and I have it on my hands a lot. And having stuff on my hands and fingers can sometimes trigger it, and I'm worried that the oil pastels getting all over my hands will trigger it, and I don't want it to. So yeah, a lot of reasons for me to not like oil pastels. But obviously in this video, I'm giving them a second chance. It's been a long time since I've used them. Maybe I've inflated how awful they are in my memory, right? Not to mention a lot of these concerns are hypothetical based on how I think it'll go working with them, and I haven't worked with them in a long time, so maybe I just misremember. So I approached the pastel side in basically the same way as the crayons. I started with really light layers of the undertones and slowly built up the saturation and value. But this time I had no point, much less control, and a lot more sticking and crumbs happening. And I also had to manually blend, gross, with my fingers, and occasionally a Q-tip. It was different right off the bat. Because it's a more wet medium, it definitely worked differently than the crayons did. Getting a really light pass was much more difficult. It was harder to cover more surface area. Just like right off the bat, I could tell that crayons might be a little bit easier to work with, at least in this sense, like this type of piece that I'm doing. It was hard, I won't lie. It wasn't as hard as I thought it would be, and it went much more smoothly than I thought it would, but it wasn't easy. I had no idea how the pastels would perform or interact with each other on paper, so I really struggled with knowing how much pressure to use and where, which pastels will be totally opaque on top of each other, which will blend in or blend layers below. Like I literally just didn't know how to use them together. As I worked, I definitely started picking up on it, and there was a learning curve, but I was still never fully sure or confident in how any one pastel would work. They weren't super intuitive for me. Like, I would expect to use one pastel to blend and it would just opaquely cover layers below. I would expect to blend into a solid layer, but it would just scrape the pigment off or do nothing entirely. That whole aspect of just like not knowing how each pastel would perform was definitely my biggest struggle. There was also the issue of how messy the sticks got. I think this was an issue for me with the crayons when I used them in the previous video, but this time the crayons didn't have that issue at all, but the pastels were bad. They're so hard to clean off. I tried rubbing the sticks on my skin to get the contamination off, scraping at it with my nails, scrubbing it on paper, and it just didn't really work all the way. They were constantly transferring colors and putting pigment where I didn't want it to go and getting super muddy and just, I don't know. I can totally see why Christian does so many like monochrome pieces or why people do super like impressionistic stuff with pastels. I can see that really helping with the whole mess of it all. And then the rubbing. I didn't get it. Rubbing it in made it like streaky and kind of ugly looking instead of being like a nice flat blended area. There would be these big chunks of pigment that would get stuck in places while the pastel would just straight up rub off on other areas, so it would look really patchy and weird. I don't know if maybe I went too hard with the blending or what. I'm sure that's something that I would learn to deal with over time. Like, I would have to get used to it and learn how to properly do it. But for today, for this piece, it was difficult. It just didn't work how I expected, and I didn't know how to adjust for that as I went. I tried to blend more with the white and peach color rather than my finger and used Q-tips where I could, but that wasn't always an option. Thankfully, the sensory issues that I talked about weren't nearly as bad as I thought they would be. I definitely was having like the fingertip issue where I was having to scrape my nails a lot, but rubbing the paper wasn't nearly as bad because it was covered with the oil pastel, and I like the feel of oil pastels. I never actually had to rub paper, so that was really nice. And in terms of it getting all over my hands, that actually also wasn't an issue. I kept a rag next to me and would wipe my hands off in between each pastel. But I think my concern for that was much more related to chalk pastels than it was oil pastels. So that issue was not bad, thank God. Despite my many struggles with oil pastels, I'm actually thrilled with how the piece turned out, and I didn't actually hate my time using them at all. In fact, I would say I'm thoroughly intrigued by them and would be excited to use them again. They're definitely not my favorite art supply. I don't think this piece fully changed my mind and made me fall in love with them, but I think with some time, I could learn to really get comfortable with them. And even after one use, I know they're definitely not as awful as I remember them being. I am truly in love with how this piece turned out. I wish I had lightened the line going down the middle, because I think without it, it would almost be believable that it's like one cohesive piece. I think the colors were surprisingly close, but I did have a lot of fun doing the piece. Like I said, I adore how it came out. Okay, there we go. I did it. And you know what? I feel really good about it. I feel like I need to spray her with fixative before I put her anywhere, but I don't know how a fixative is going to affect oil pastels, because like with chalk pastels, it ruins them. So I'm definitely going to have to do some tests before I put her away. But yeah, I shockingly had a really easy and great time. And while I'm still not sold on using these art supplies on a regular basis, I am no longer like hating them. And now there's a vacant spot for like my most hated art supply. I can't think of anything that I hate now. It was definitely a challenge, but not nearly as challenging as I thought it would be. These supplies were not fighting against me, and that was a major shocker. But yeah, I had so much fun somehow, and I hope you guys did too. If you did, like, comment, subscribe, the whole deal, you know. Fun Christmas things are coming, maybe a sketchbook tour soon, so make sure you subscribe so you don't miss anything. I'm gonna go wash my desk down, so go do some cleaning, watch a Christmas movie, and go do some art.